that Russia could be a very important ally of the United States. It is the other Christian nation. And it certainly has military capabilities that, as best I understand it, despite President Trump saying that we have the strongest military by far in the world, I believe the experts say that is not the fact. That the Bolsheviks were outside invaders put in 1917 by the elitists, were able to get control of that government and of many of the people there and use this communist propaganda dogma in order to kill those tens of millions of people, keeping control of the country and its vast resources. Soviet Union fell, Bolsheviks got thrown out, and in large part came to the United States.
The scientists at LivePet are hard at work solving our cancer epidemic. They have the most promising cancer trials going on now with pet clinics around the country that I have ever seen. You can see the promising cancer research and trials going on some of the past shows that I've done. The links are below. While working with C60 and other ingredients, these talented scientists developed a hair growth serum that really works. They sat on it for years. After all, cancer is their focus. But they now realize how much the profits from this product could really help their cancer research. So the C360 hair growth product was launched. C360 hair growth is specifically designed to revive your hair growth by targeting hair follicles and restarting your hair growth cycle. C60, the active ingredient in C360 hair growth, reactivates hair follicles that have stalled due to hereditary hair loss, physical conditions, or environmental factors that may affect follicle production. You will begin to see visible results using C360 hair growth within 3 to 6 weeks. Buy today knowing that your future hair growth will help fund very promising cancer research. See more at the link below.
Well, let me ask you, the elites have more money than the United States of America, the U.S. They have, as you've reported in the past. So do you think that they can just use their money, which they're trying to now, to create a hot war? I mean, are we going to see military fighting, a revolutionary style in this country?
I've been doubtful that would happen in this country. I think that more likely what they're trying to do is get a war started elsewhere that involves this country against the major powers. There have been efforts, I believe, to start a war that would place the U.S. as adversaries, of course, against Russia and against China. And just in the last few days, there have been reports of very specific and strenuous activity in trying to get a war started by, from our side, forcing sanctions against Iran, that really, in terms of any threat of Iran against us, I think is just completely far-fetched. But nevertheless, the sanctions against Iran could be a cover story for a closing of the Hormuz Strait. That would be, I'm told, and I certainly can't disagree with it, that it would amount to, over a period of months, would become a horrendous economic blow to the world's prosperity. And in that circumstance, it could result in a war pitting China against the United States and Russia on China's side, because both Russia and China are supporting Iran, not the United States. So somehow or other, these things that are still giving us trouble from the United States' own viewpoint. In my estimation, the Venezuelan confrontation is another circumstance in which the reports I get are that the so-called people's president from the legislature of Venezuela, that the United States has been strongly supporting, I'm told is actually the candidate of the ruling elite, and that he is their tool for gaining direct control and ownership of the Venezuelan oil, not only the production, but also the reserves. That would give them some additional access to wealth, which goes back to your question. Are they able to access their wealth in order to achieve all these objectives of trying to pull down the United States government and the Western civilization? In those circumstances, it seems to me, although I've felt in the past that Maduro has certainly been presented as a dictator, the evidence is that he was strongly elected by the people and is still supported by the people. That is, it's the legislative head that is the elitist tool. And in that circumstance, it would appear to be the situation that President Trump understands this and will somehow turn the situation of the threats against the Venezuelan present government into the same kind of outcome that happened in North Korea just a year or so ago, in which there was drumbeats of war. We're going to bomb this and so forth and so on. And then all of a sudden, there's a shift of positions, and all of a sudden we're in negotiations for a good outcome. I'm hoping that's going to be the case in Venezuela. I would certainly love to see that kind of an outcome as well in regard to Iran and the situation with both Russia and China, because in large part, I do think there's every reason to think that Russia could be a very important ally of the United States. It is the other Christian nation. And it certainly has military capabilities that, as best I understand it, despite President Trump saying that we have the strongest military by far in the world, I believe the experts say that is not the fact.
That they are ahead of us. Russia is.
Substantially so.
Yeah, and ahead scientifically and physics and everywhere. But do you think that Russia is more awake than us as well? Because they had their czar get killed, right, by the cabal, and over 100 million Christians get killed, and then their whole country collapsed. So they've went through a lot more than the United States from the cabal standpoint. So are they more awake, or are they as clueless as U.S. citizens?
I really can't say. I think that they certainly have a different worldview than we do, because they've seen their experience from the inside. And people in the United States have not been well informed about their experience at all. And really, in large part, the media treats Russia as if they are still basically communist, and that they just have Putin as a so-called elected leader. The fact of the matter, in my opinion, is that the Bolsheviks were outside invaders put in 1917 by the elitists, were able to get control of that government and of many of the people there, and use this communist propaganda dogma in order to kill those tens of millions of people, keeping control of the country and its vast resources. And they were thrown out. The fact that the Soviet Union fell, I think, was claimed as a victory by the United States. and assisting their overthrow. But essentially what happened is the Bolsheviks got thrown out and in large part came to the United States.
We became Russia. And a lot of people are saying that. Some people are saying that the elites, the cabal, are ready to ditch the whole West and just take on the East. Is that the case where they're going to be controlling the East with their wealth, or are they being ditched everywhere?
Well, I think that there's certainly the prospect. I'm inclined to think at this time, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where China is on this situation. I understand that they have been approached by the cabal to be on their side and to, give them solace in terms of the central banks and that sort of thing. But I believe Russia has been on the other side of that equation and has been a target of certainly continues to be a target as it has been for the past century of the cabal. But I think our best chance is that Russia would oppose them. They have been opposing them. And I don't see why China can't be a part of that as well. And I think that President Trump, as I read his body language, I think that he has hopes of that as well. If the three major powers there are able to overcome the power of the cabal within their own governments and their own politics, then I think there's a very great chance that the world could really move forward as practically as a whole, although as separate nations, not as a globalist dictatorship as the cabal has been planning for so many generations.
And you're at the most positive point you've ever been since you started in this journey, because you've been pretty pessimistic overall when you started doing the Fruits of Graft and you started learning what was really going on. And now, because it says a lot that you're positive and that you're seeing something here.
Well, certainly the election of President Trump, in my estimation, was almost completely, well, not completely, but it was almost beyond hope that such a thing could happen, that a non-establishment, non-cabal operative could become president of the United States, because frankly, even President Kennedy, in my estimation, was a cabal elected president.
That turned?
That turned during his term in office. And once it was clear that he did that, once he saw the depth of, I don't think he was aware of just how evil they are. And once he could see that, he made his turn pretty explicit in a number of important actions, and they killed him for it almost immediately. And in broad daylight, very brutally and so forth. And most of what we've seen about that assassination has been put in terms, if at all, of the personalities of the various politicians, such as LBJ and others, and various operatives like the head of the FBI, Hoover, and the CIA, Dulles, and so forth. Yes, those are all operatives, and some of them are pretty high operatives, were of the ruling elite. But it was the elite that did that.
There's somebody behind that.
And,
yes.
And they were the cabalists that have control of various nations, and certainly they were not going to allow somebody to challenge their central bank, which Kennedy did, by going a different way than Federal Reserve notes. And so, in that circumstance, we come around to Trump. And he was the elected opponent of the establishment. He said so in his election rhetoric, his run-up to the election, in very explicit terms. And it was almost too much to hope, although in terms of watching that circumstance, you could see that the polls were lying. The media were clearly lying about the prospects for the election, and of course, the go-to method was they were going to steal it at the polls, and I'm fully convinced that there were 5 states actually stolen, but she was so unpopular, even in normally blue states, that they needed to steal 5 more states, and they were stopped from doing it. And I think they were stopped by the kind of military and intelligence capability that had been acquired by the anti-establishment people, the patriots of the American system that had survived purges from the military and so forth. And as a result, we had this unheard of victory. I mean, I've said it numerous times before with you, dodging the bullet. That may very well have been the person who viewed herself as the closer for finally getting rid of the middle class. And so in that circumstance, yes, that was an exhilarating experience for me, and one that has certainly made me more and more optimistic as things came along and Q came out, not into the open, but made his presence available to provide us with information about what is going on behind the scenes. You understand, in large part, if QAnon were not there, much of what we're seeing in news about behind the scenes operations, we would still not know. Now, we might have been able to pick up things such as the number of unsealed indictments. It's over 70,000 now. And as I said in this recent piece, through the entire period of time since the election of President Trump, that's something like 5,000 per month. Actually, I think maybe that runs from not the election of President Trump, but his signing of the executive order that declares a national emergency based on due to human trafficking and the kinds of outrageous activities with women, children, humans of all sexes.
Organ trafficking, all sorts of stuff. Can I ask you, how does the cabal stay in power through generation after generation? Is it their children, or do they have the ability to stay alive longer? I've heard both.
Well, I've seen some indication that they stay alive by some means longer, but I think they go from generation to generation as best I know. I think in large part the way they perpetuate their evil practices is that they inflict these evils on their children as not an indoctrination. It is a breakdown of their normal human psyche, in my estimation, that gets them into the same kind of evil practices that the parents, grandparents, and so forth have had, and makes them believe that the kinds of things they're doing are their appropriate role in life. Maybe some of them don't take, maybe those don't survive, I don't know. But some of them are multi-generational.
And they justify it by saying, unless we do this, they're not going to be strong enough to make the decisions they need to make.
I would say something of that nature. But their outlook on humanity is so completely, what I'd have to say from any standpoint of morality is just so downright cruel and evil. It's something that surpasses the ability of to be regarded as humanity. Some say that they are based upon different species, and that there are many species in the universe, including on Earth. I'm not capable in those things in order to speak with any kind of confidence about that situation, but there's certainly evidence to indicate that ought to be better understood than I understand it. We'll put it that way.
Well, it's hard for a healthy, normal person to understand this, and that's why it's so easy for them to get away with it.
Well, in terms of this kind of understanding. As you well know, I've said in many of our conversations that this whole thing about attention to the Great Depression and exactly what was done to it, that understanding is so much a part of what forms the worldview of most Americans that if you believe the big lie about the Great Depression, that the government did everything it could to try to make things better and to get us out of it and to help people and to feed people and so forth, that creates a worldview of what people are really like and what our leadership is really like and what the controlling people are really like that is so false that it really inhibits your capability to understand what the ruling cabal is capable of doing and what likely they're doing behind the scenes to create the conditions, and that they're creating lies to mislead us even now today. So if you go back and understand what our parents and grandparents actually had to live through, actually what was done to them to make it much, much worse for them by our government, it changes the way you look at the world and the way you are able to comprehend what our so-called leadership is capable of doing against us now. I mean, to say, for example, to a person who doesn't understand the Great Depression, if I state to them the administration of ex-president in the last 8 years was intentionally designed economically to make people as poor and as unemployed in the United States as possible, they say, well, no, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't. They're trying to do their best. It's just a disagreement. I'm sorry. There's just too much understanding and knowledge of what is good for business and what is bad for business. And let me tell you, yes, the Obama administration did economic policies that, in my view, as I was watching them, they were clearly designed to make certain that jobs did not get better or more plentiful, that people didn't get more employed. But that was exactly the same thing that Roosevelt did in spades back during the Great Depression.
So basically, you have to believe they're that incompetent, and that's what people they don't grasp that. Your Fruits of Graft, your book that's sitting there that people can see, is really helps people understand the Great Depression. There's nothing else like it out there. And you just ran your second printing, right? It's starting to really take off as people are realizing there's a wealth of information and research that you did. Can you talk about it a little bit as we finalize here and how people can get a hold of it?
Oh, yes. Well, thanks to your introduction, more than one, in part, yours and others to SGT report. Sean there, I know you're friends with him and very well know his work. He invited me on and had an interview. He released his interview at something like 15 or 20 minutes after midnight one night. And by the time I got up and knew that it was posted the next morning, my inventory of books was half gone at least. And it was fully gone before the end of the day. In the circumstance, it was quite an experience to deal with that. The fact that I have two of my books here in sight for your audience was simply sort of a little indication. One of them is from the new printing, so it's out as of yesterday. So shipping will begin, I think, with certainty this next week. And so I'm looking forward to that happening. This, of course, today is Saturday, the 16th of February. But in any event, I'm happy to have them going again.
You can't get this information. You can't get this information anywhere else at this point. The amount of research you did and work you put into this was enormous.
Well,
and I had you on that went through a bunch of it. I mean, with the Great Depression, I have like 6 episodes, and you just touched on it. There is so much research behind this, and everything you have is verified through things that you found, right? Through, I mean, where did you get all this information?
Well, a number of different places. I'd have to refer you to my bibliography in the book. There are quite a number of sources. Some of them are so-called respected historians that they report these ins and outs, but they don't do the job of relating it to exactly how that affects the economy. And those kinds of sources can be useful in rounding out the picture. But at the same time, the economic activities, many of those during the Great Depression actually came from the personal diary of the Treasury Secretary for FDR. His personal experiences with the president and and his actions on it, all of which make a pretty complete picture that this was a knowing thing. It was the idea that FDR was the man of the people, a traitor against his elite class, was such a fiction. Behind the scenes, it was quite clear what he was about. It wasn't quite clear to everybody. It was at least brought out by the kind of evidence I had. And your point about it not being available elsewhere, if there had been another book elsewhere, I guarantee you I would not have spent my time this way. I would have pumped that book and so forth and so on. But it took 6 years.
6 years of research. You just put your life into it.
Well, research, writing, editing, and so forth, and getting the printing. That's what it took. But nevertheless, the facts, if they were available anyplace else, I'd point that to it as well. As of right now, to my knowledge, this is the only book. And the people who are in a position to acknowledge and actually to step forward and say so, the so-called academic historians and so forth, they have been completely silent. Before my book came out, I was a fairly close acquaintance, friend of a professor of economics in 2 universities on the West Coast. He's not said a word about it.
They can't. They're going to lose their jobs. They can't.
It's too late. It's too late for can't.
Well, they can.
The facts are there, and it's going to be out, I think, one way or another. I'm getting more convinced that we're going to get there.
Exactly.
Somebody needs to.
Are you seeing a dribbling? Are you seeing a dribbling of people starting to support it? Like, I think there's more and more university people who are warming up to saying, I need to do what's right. I need to have courage, and I need to step out and say the truth.
I am somewhat encouraged. I think it's going to take more than what I've seen so far. I have had a few during this recent period of time, multi-copy orders that I could identify as at least one ordered 10 in a hurry from an academic institution on the East Coast, and in an elitist area of no less. And
oh, sure.
I just got an order this morning for
this.
5 copies from a blue state.
Good.
I'm not sure exactly.
Perfect.
That may be a dissident in the blue state, but nevertheless, there's some encouraging signs.
Well, because I have a lot of professors, university people. I taught at a university for 5 years, and they're not sure what to think about me now. So I've had like a year of not teaching. I would love to teach again, but I know I'm very controversial by just talking about truth. And asking these questions. I don't know what the truth is and all this stuff, but I definitely want to ask the questions because it's out there. There's just something everybody knows. And so I have a lot of university professors and things that follow my work, and I'm sure you do as well. And they're learning, and they're saying, wait a minute, there's something not right here. And I think there's going to be a tipping point where university people are going to say, hey, I now have the courage to come forward and say there's something different than what we were taught. And we need to start teaching the truth, and or at least start researching different ways of looking at history and looking at science. Science is way off. I keep saying this, our science is way off. We've got to look at things
I'll say
differently.
The key to my success, I think, or the success of this book, is Donald J. Trump and his success, and the success of our government in taking back actual constitutional government by the people, and allowing free, good information to flow, as opposed to this very censorship-ridden society that we have been living in my entire life. So let's see what we can do. Thank you so much for having me. I know I've been long-winded at times.
No, I really enjoy having you on, and censorship really is ramping up. So we'll see how this show does. I mean, some of our past shows, like I've told you before we got on air, my subscribers are twice what they were last summer, and my numbers are down. And I used to be able to get 3,500 views an hour, and now I can't get more than 600. I mean, they are really controlling my numbers, even though my subscribers are way up.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Unless people don't like me or something, but that doesn't make sense. How can my subscribers be up and then the numbers? They figured out how to do it better. Whereas before I'd get like 3,500 an hour and then all of a sudden go down to like 10.
Yes.
So
yes.
I knew they were messing with it.
Yes.
Now they're doing it in a less obvious way, but more effective, I think. They're really hammering us. And I think that all started the last week of January of this year, where they really put the hammer down, because that's when I really felt it. A lot of my shows, this one will probably be demonetized. I mean, I have a slew of them now that are being demonetized. Anytime you talk about something like this, they get scared and demonetize it. And it's frustrating. But you didn't tell us where we could get your book.
Classicalcapital.com. That's the place to get it.
Okay.
I might say that I now have separate tabs for those in different countries. I had to spend quite a lot of time with the international buyers in terms of collecting their postage. It's so expensive to send in many cases. Practically almost most cases, it's more expensive to pay the postage than it is the book. And so in an event, I've got different tabs for them now in order for them to see the postage up front, and I discount it somewhat. But nevertheless, classicalcapital.com, I'm not sure whether I'm going to go back on Amazon or not. They're very difficult to deal with during this period of time. You can't talk with anybody because they first, for example, put me up as a bestseller on December 19th, as soon as that interview came out. And then immediately were telling me they were going to cancel my page because I wasn't shipping promptly enough. So it's been difficult to deal with them. Plus the fact that Bezos is, I think, certainly on the other side of the equation, and I don't like to do business with this company. Maybe I'll put it back on there just for convenience of people who go there. But classicalcapital.com, I would think would be the preferred place to go. You don't have to pay for postage there if you get the regular mailing from within the United States.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Wayne. And I really, like I said, I love it when you come onto the show, and I really appreciate it. Thank
you for having me, and thanks a lot to your audience. They've really been so nice to me, very understanding and receptive people in terms of information. Thank you.
What you have been asking for is finally here. The Matrix Solutions Deprogramming Series, Your Right of Self-Determination, by Prime Minister David Williams, and broken down in manageable pieces for you to finally learn the truth as to what your right of self-determination really is. So now is your time to start down the track of learning to think again. Start with your right of self-determination. Use the link below to gain access to this valuable information.